Well, it's been a few days now since I saw James Gunn's Superman and announced my unfortunate disappointment with it, and by now, I imagine just about everyone most eager to see the film has done so and formed their opinions, making the internet just as entertaining as ever. So, where do I stand on it now that I've had some time for the film to sit with me? Well, I first came out of the theater underwhelmed but positive, but I have to say, the more I've thought about it since then, the more I really can't say I like this film, which hurts to say because I really wanted another good Superman story to celebrate. Still, I didn't just want to make a video trashing on it, so I took my time to figure out what I wanted to say here. Before I saw Superman, the video I wanted to make about it was going to compare it to Man of Steel, not deciding which was better, but exploring why I loved each movie in spite of their flaws, and why I was glad to have both. However, I can't say that I ended up liking James Gunn's Superman nearly as much as I love Man of Steel, so I had to rethink the video a bit. But I kept thinking about the relationship between these two movies, and found that it's a lot more complicated than my initial video idea would have acknowledged. In fact, thinking about how people look back on Man of Steel, and how they're reacting to Superman, I realized just how little we actually judge movies like this in isolation, based purely on their own merits, which is what I'm here to talk about today. But before I get into it, you should know that I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Also, I will warn you that I couldn't help but get a bit more negative than I wanted to in parts of this video, so I made sure to end on a positive note, which is my favorite part of this video, so please stick around for that, or at least use the timestamps to skip to it if you ever get bored rather than just clicking away. Now, without further ado, let's explore how Superman has been represented in his last couple adaptations, why Man of Steel receives so much hate, why the fandom is now so divided, and whether the newest film truly deserves the adoration it has received. The day before going to see the new Superman, I rewatched Man of Steel in order to compare them as fairly as possible. Again, not necessarily to judge one as better than the other, but just to compare their approaches to the characters and their respective strengths and weaknesses as films. And, well, I was reminded just how great Man of Steel is. I've always loved and defended it, but even my recollection of it has too often been tainted by the confusion and stumblings of later films. While it's by no means a perfect film, and I'd make quite a few changes to it if I could, the most crucial of which I described in one of my first videos on the channel, it captures, more than any film or television series before or since, the grand, epic scale and thrilling sense of triumph you should feel when watching a cinematic treatment of the world's first, greatest, and most iconic superhero. And I have to give at least half the credit for that to Hans Zimmer, with his grand sweeping score and Snyder's somehow simultaneously super grounded and super stylized directing. This movie truly feels like a Superman movie in the most awesome way possible. Now, you may well say that's all fine and good, but it's secondary to an earnest and optimistic depiction of the hero himself. And you might be right, but the main thing I was reminded of when I rewatched this film was how perfect Henry Cavill was in the role, before Batman v Superman forced him to grimace his way through a 3-hour slog without any love for his job or the people he serves. Sure, Man of Steel could easily have given him a bit more of a gentle, optimistic side, and shown a couple more instances of him trying to save people, and I'd again recommend my old video for some of my suggestions in that regard. But to say Cavill never smiles or shows compassion, to pretend he's some stoic, edgy badass from his first entry in the role to his last, is just to cherry pick the moments that best illustrate your point and ignore the rest. This Superman, while certainly far more reserved and intimidating than Cornsweat's, is no superpowered Batman like some claim. He has plenty of moments of humble sincerity, most notably with his mother and with Lois, and he smiles and jokes in his interactions with people like General Swanwick. This movie has its issues, but Henry Cavill's portrayal of Superman is not one of them. Sadly, the legacy of this movie has been horribly tainted by what came next. I have defended core aspects of BVS and will continue to do so, but it had no idea what to do with Superman. I don't want to get caught up focused on this movie, but I firmly believe that it is the primary reason people look back so harshly on Man of Steel. Rather than judging each movie on its own merits, most people likely came out of BVS with their feelings sour toward this iteration of the character in all his appearances. Now, many look back on this incredible film and they just remember the parts that most align with how Superman was portrayed in his next film. If only BVS had shown him grappling with his guilt and trauma from his actions in the previous movie and striving to atone, and emphasized his love for humanity and his struggle to hold on to his own humanity rather than allow his godlike status to consume him, then perhaps we'd be remembering his first outing far more fondly. Incidentally, though, it wasn't just Cavill's Superman that was harmed in the audience's perception by BVS. The entire grounded approach to this world and its characters, initially envisioned by David Goyer and Christopher Nolan, became one of the major focuses of people's hate toward BVS and Zack Snyder himself, resulting in Warner Bros.' disastrous course correction with Justice League and everything that came after. No one who actually takes a moment to analyze Batman v Superman and identify its most crippling weaknesses will conclude that it failed because it was so grounded in reality. But with the then 15-year-long trend of gritty adaptations and reboots growing stale, and the MCU's lighter tone dominating cinemas, it was an easy target for angry audiences to focus their ire. Ever since this shift in public consciousness, a willingness to embrace the most wacky, colorful, and fantastical parts of the source material has largely been the most celebrated quality a comic book adaptation can have. While I don't want to get too ahead of myself, I will say right now that while I am generally a sucker for a good grounded take on an epic fantastical story, I do appreciate having more variety and vibrancy in my movies, and I think it's good for filmmakers not to have to feel constrained by reality or afraid to have fun with their adaptations. However, I do worry that freedom comes with its own fear. The fear of taking anything too seriously. But I'll come back to that later. Of course, we know not everyone hated Snyder's films, and we certainly know the Snyder cultists, not to be confused with actual Snyder fans, who just want to burn the whole world down until we all capitulate and make Zack Snyder God Emperor of the Universe, or whatever their end goal is. However, I think most fans and general audiences, even those who liked Snyder's films, were ready for something new by the time James Gunn came into the picture, and many were so soured on absolutely everything that had defined Man of Steel that they were ecstatic to see the complete and total opposite of Snyder's vision in every conceivable way. I was not so much at first. The DCEU was a disaster, so I was happy to see it put down, but I was highly skeptical about the concept of a James Gunn Superman film. You can go watch my old video expressing my fears about it back when all we had were some set photos, but in short, I was afraid that Gunn wouldn't be able to give Superman the reverence, weight, and sheer epic scale he deserves. I thought James bringing a bit of his flavor to Superman could be alright, but I did not want to see Superman brought into a typical James Gunn film. Plus, I was worried about the film's ability to balance the inherent humor and lightheartedness of such an insanely fantastical world with the earnest sincerity and seriousness needed to treat Superman as anything more than a joke. I wanted to believe that Superman, the epitome of pure optimism and love of humanity, could exist in reality, and I feared that removing him so far from reality and treating his story so lightly would make him harder to take seriously and find inspiring. Not to mention concerns about the film being overcrowded with heroes or my uncontroversial dislike of the costume. Obviously, I was not alone in my concerns, but while many who shared them were rallied in preemptive hatred toward the film by the Snyder cultists, I eventually decided that I wanted this movie to be good, and I was not going to bias myself against it by expecting the worst. The trailers came out, and I let myself get hyped. As much as I love a good grounded story, I realized that every previous live-action iteration of Superman has already been quite grounded to varying degrees, so I figured I'd be glad we were getting something new and enjoy it for what it was. As I said in my video announcing my change of heart, I was inspired by Superman himself, and I was ready to hope again. Then the movie came out, and the old skeptic I'd long since buried got to give an extremely vindicating "I told you so." I came out of the theater simply underwhelmed, but still largely positive, as I was trying to focus on the best in it. But the longer I sat thinking about it over the next 24 hours, the more plot holes I found, the more character inconsistencies and tonal breaks I noticed, and the more frustrated I got. I won't be giving an in-depth breakdown of everything that bothers me in this movie. Jeremy Jahns did a great job with that already. But my biggest issue, as I touched on in my initial reaction, was just how light it was. Not light as opposed to dark, but light as opposed to heavy. Remember, I had just watched Man of Steel the night before, one of the most epic movies I'd ever seen. And by comparison, this film had all the weight, all the scale, and all the stakes of an episode of a kids' cartoon. Not a bad kids' cartoon by any means, but that's about the standard it seemed to be trying to reach. Plus, absolutely nothing in this film makes sense. It is the ultimate turn off your brain and have fun kind of story. And before you jump to the defense of the film's fantastical setting and say it's not supposed to make sense, that it's just a live action comic book, you should know that Crypto was one of my favorite parts of the movie. It wasn't the fact that this story takes place in a heightened reality in which what's possible defies any laws of physics that bothered me. Flying dogs, pocket dimensions, kaiju, and interdimensional imps can all be taken seriously as long as the characters in the world take them seriously. The problem is, no one in the world takes them seriously, so neither can I. But besides that, a world operating on its own rules doesn't let you hand-wave away anything that doesn't make sense, like how time seems to slow down for the whole world off screen to allow Lex to raid the Fortress of Solitude, decipher an alien message, get all the way back to the United States, and have that alien message verified by a ton of experts, have it sent to virtually every news station in the world, and then get himself onto a talk show to talk about it, all in the time it takes Superman and the Justice Gang to take out one monster. Or, how about why the government totally trusts Luthor to do their job for them without bothering to look into his activities, or take a tour of his interdimensional prison? Or why Luthor doesn't kill Superman when he has the chance, and basically hands him the key to his own escape, only to be shocked when he uses it? Or, why on earth Lex Luthor would engineer an army of intelligent monkeys to troll Superman online, when actual bot farms exist in reality that do the same thing with infinitely more efficiency? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. These things aren't explained by the fantastical setting. They're just lazy writing, or dumb jokes that feel totally out of place in this world. Now, if you love this movie, you may just call me obnoxiously critical, but my emotional investment is inversely proportional to my suspension of disbelief. So if I have to crank my suspension of disbelief all the way up to 100% to cover not only the ridiculous rules of the world, but also the narrative inconsistencies and nonsensical decision-making in order to enjoy a movie, I lose all emotional investment. Not that this movie quite made me lose all emotional investment, but it certainly dampened it quite a bit. Alright, now that I've let myself complain, I have to reiterate that, all in all, I did like this movie. At least as I watched it. It was, for the most part, genuinely funny. It had some really cool action, and most importantly, the cast all brought their characters to life brilliantly. And though the pacing was at a sprint, the few brief moments of drama between the nearly non-stop action sequences were easily the highlights of the movie. It was an entertaining little adventure sprinkled with a bit of heart and showcasing a fresh, likable interpretation of Superman. I was just disappointed that it wasn't so much more than that. Going into this film, I wanted to believe that a Superman movie could be lighthearted, family-friendly fun, set in a fantastical world and filled with a genuine spirit of optimism, while still taking itself seriously and being every bit as awesome as Superman should be. And I'm sad that this movie instead reinforced the idea that it couldn't be both. This truly was the complete and total opposite of Man of Steel. Not only being funny, hopeful, and ridiculous, where Snyder's vision was dark, gritty, and grounded, as we all hoped it would be, but also being silly, where Snyder wasn't afraid to be serious, and stupid, where Snyder made everything spectacular. So those are my thoughts, but what is everyone else saying? Well, this movie is pretty much whatever people want it to be. Those who loved what came before can't stand the change in style, the most fanatical of them making up a bunch of unfounded nonsense about it being woke to scare away audiences even though it has plenty of very real issues to point out, while those who just want whatever is as different from Snyder's films as possible are fully embracing this massive overcorrection. This is pretty much exactly what I expected to happen, and as time goes on, I suspect it will become even more divisive. In fact, we're already beginning to see that polarization growing. Before the movie came out, the only fanatics appeared to be the Snyder cultists, as they were the only ones who needed to deny reality and attack an imaginary enemy to support their cause. However, now that people are seeing it and judging it for themselves, the number of people disliking the film for totally valid reasons is quickly growing, and we are beginning to see the fanaticism of those who insist that anyone who loves this movie less than them must hate Superman and all that he stands for. I doubt they even see the movie itself as a movie so much as an idealized symbol for everything Superman means to them, delusionally interpreting any criticism toward the film as hate for its titular character. I'm not lumping everyone who loves the movie into this small crowd, of course, as it's still liked by the majority of audiences. But even many of those who simply enjoyed the movie for being so different from previous adaptations are applying a pretty blatant double standard to it, focusing their criticisms of films like Man of Steel on things that they barely notice in this film because it otherwise suits their preferences. If you've seen my initial reaction video, you know what I'm talking about. For whatever reason, it seems everyone considers Henry Cavill a monster for snapping Zod's neck to save a family after pleading with him to stop, and then breaking down weeping with guilt. But they have no problem with David Cornsweet casually kicking his brainwashed clone into a black hole, and then making a joke before jumping back to work like nothing happened. I'm not saying that Cornsweet's action wasn't justified given the circumstance, it's not really a big problem with the movie, but I can't stand that everyone points to the end of Man of Steel as a desecration of Superman's character, while completely glossing over a far more casual act of violence in this movie and praising it as the best Superman since Christopher Reeve, who also killed Zod and his cronies, by the way, after they were totally harmless, I might add. So please stop singling out Henry Cavill when his actions were more justified than anyone else's. Oh, and back to this movie, I could point out all the times that people could have or honestly should have died thanks to Superman, like when he laser eyes all those raptors out of the sky, or makes no real effort to stop Krypto from tearing into Lex, but I don't know that that's necessary. I think you get the message. Anyway, my point with all of this is just to emphasize that even when we're well-intentioned, we rarely judge our films as fairly as we think we do. People love this film less because it's a great film, and more because it's a relief from what came before. And people criticize things about Man of Steel that are present in other films everyone loves, not because those things are really that bad, but because they're low-hanging fruit in a film whose legacy was already tainted by its terrible sequel. All of which begs the question, how will this new Superman film be remembered as time goes on? Honestly, this movie's story is pretty forgettable to me. The plot is already rapidly slipping from my mind after just a few days, so I doubt it will really be remembered by most people for its own merits, as much as for what it started. I suspect this movie's greatest legacy will be shifting the tone of the entire superhero genre, opening what some are already calling the Silver Age of comic book adaptations. Considering that, I imagine how we will look back on it in years to come will be very determined by what comes next from the DCU. So let's hope James Gunn and his team really up their game going forward. Alright, as I said early on, I feel this video has been far more negative than I hoped it would be, so I want to end by saying that I'm glad this newest installment in Superman's cinematic legacy exists to add to all that's come before. It may not have been the dramatic epic I hoped it would be, but it introduced us to an incredibly rich version of the DC universe that I can't wait to explore further, and it gave us a brand new take on Superman as a character, one that feels unique and original, yet faithful to his core traits and values, and worthy to stand among the best who've come before. It's a very flawed film, but so is Man of Steel. I may much prefer one over the other, but I can totally respect those who disagree with me on that. Ultimately, Superman, the character, is so much more than one director's vision or one actor's performance. He is way too big for one film to capture, as he means so much to so many different people. Honestly, there is no one definitive Superman in my mind. Superman is an ideal, an embodiment of hope, humility, and love for humanity. Superman represents the belief that there is good in every human being worth fighting for. He shows us what true strength looks like, not just in his Herculean feats, but in his selfless acts of courage and kindness. He is the pinnacle of masculinity, of humanity, a modern messianic figure that bridges the gap between the divine to which we aspire and the imperfect mortality we now endure. How can someone like that be depicted perfectly for everyone in a single adaptation? He can't be. And that's why I welcome each new face to don the cape, each new visionary to tell his story, because though some may have more to offer than others, and certainly none will appeal to all fans equally, they all contribute to our collective dream, our aspiration, our vision of what it means to be Superman. As always, thank you so much for joining me. But I'm just here to kick off the discussion, so I hope you'll join me down below to share your thoughts on the new Superman, on the Supermen who've come before, and what Superman means for you. Which are your favorite iterations? What were your expectations for James Gunn's latest film, and how did he meet or fail them? I look forward to hearing from you and continuing the discussion with you there. Until next time, never stay silent.